My billionaire CEO never smiled. That's not an exaggeration. In the 3 years I'd worked at Hale Tech, I'd seen Victoria Hale in person maybe 5 times. Each time felt less like seeing a human being, and more like watching a storm pass through the building. People in the office called her the Ice Queen. Not to her face, of course. Nobody had that kind of courage. Victoria Hale was 35 years old and ran one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the country. Hale Tech software powered hospitals, banks, and half the logistics networks in North America. Investors loved her. The board feared her. The media called her the most ruthless mind in Silicon Valley. And in the office, people lowered their voices when she walked past. So when I got the message that night, I assumed it was a mistake. It was almost 10:30 p.m. The building was mostly empty. I was still in the IT department on the 14th floor, trying to fix a network issue that had been crashing the accounting servers all day. My phone buzzed. An internal message. Assistant to Che. Mr. Carter, Miss Hale would like to see you in her office tonight. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Me? Ethan Carter, systems engineer. The kind of employee nobody noticed, unless the internet stopped working. I typed back. Are you sure? The reply came immediately. Yes. Penthouse office. Now. I checked the time again. 10:02, 10:31 p.m. The entire building felt strangely quiet. Something about that message made the back of my neck tighten. But when the CEO of a billion-dollar company asks to see you, you don't exactly ignore it. So I shut down my computer, grabbed my jacket, and took the elevator to the top floor. Victoria Hale's office sat on the very top level of the Hale Tech headquarters. Most employees never saw it. The elevator doors opened onto a private hallway with dark glass walls and a single reception desk. At night, the floor was empty, except for the city lights reflecting through the windows. The assistant wasn't there, only silence. At the end of the hallway was a set of tall wooden doors. Her office. I hesitated for a second. Then I knocked. Come in, a calm voice said. I opened the door and stepped into one of the most expensive rooms I had ever seen. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across the entire wall, revealing the skyline glowing against the night sky. The office itself was minimal, a long desk, a few shelves, soft lighting. Victoria Hale stood by the window. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the city. For a moment, I just stood there awkwardly. Victoria finally turned around. She wore a dark suit, perfectly tailored, her black hair pulled back neatly. The expression on her face was the same one I'd seen every time before, calm, controlled, impossible to read. Her eyes studied me like she was evaluating a machine. Mr. Carter, she said. Her voice was quiet but precise. Yes, ma'am. She gestured toward the chair across from her desk. Sit. I sat. My brain was racing through every possible reason I might be here. Had I broken something in the system? Did someone blame me for a server crash? Was I about to get fired? Victoria walked slowly around the desk and sat across from me. She didn't waste time. I'm going to ask you something unusual tonight. That sentence alone made my stomach tighten. She slid a thin folder across the desk toward me. Read that. I opened it. Inside was a short legal document. At the top was a number. 50,000,000. I blinked. Then I read the title. Private Contractual Agreement, Confidential. My brain struggled to catch up. What is this? Victoria watched me carefully. A proposal. I flipped through the pages. The words slowly started making sense. And when they did, I thought I must have misunderstood. I looked back up at her. You can't be serious. Victoria didn't react. She simply folded her hands on the desk. I'm very serious. I shook my head. This says... I stopped mid-sentence because even saying it felt ridiculous. This says you want me to pretend to be your husband. Silence filled the room. Victoria didn't blink. Yes. For a moment I just stared at her. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was the only reaction my brain could produce. This is some kind of joke, right? Her expression didn't change. Do I look like I'm joking? No. She didn't, which somehow made the situation even more surreal. I pushed the contract back toward her. With respect, Miss Hale, this is insane. She tilted her head slightly. Why? Why? I repeated. I leaned back in the chair, running a hand through my hair. You're asking a random IT engineer to pretend to be your husband. Yes. For 3 months. Yes. And you're offering $500,000. Yes. The way she said it, calm, factual, made it sound like she was discussing software updates. I exhaled slowly. I think you've got the wrong guy. Victoria's eyes remained steady on mine. No. I chose the right one. That sentence landed strangely in the air. Before I could respond, she said something that made my brain freeze. This isn't about money. She paused. My son is involved. The room went quiet. I blinked. You have a son? That was not information anyone in the company knew. Victoria watched my reaction carefully. Yes, and you want me to pretend to be his father. Only publicly. I shook my head again. I don't understand. Victoria leaned back slightly in her chair, and for the first time since I entered the room, her voice changed just a little. Still calm, but heavier. There are people on the board who want me removed as CEO. That part made sense. Corporate politics was always brutal, but she continued, they believe I've been hiding something. My chest tightened. What? Victoria held my gaze. The truth about my son's father. I felt the room grow quieter somehow. Outside the windows, the city lights flickered in the distance. Who was he? I asked carefully. She answered without hesitation. Daniel Ross. The name hit me instantly. Even someone in IT knew that name. Daniel Ross had been one of HaleTech's original founders. 7 years ago, he'd been accused of stealing millions from the company, a scandal that nearly destroyed the business. Then he died in a car accident before the investigation finished. And now, Victoria Hale was telling me he was the father of her child. My mind spun. If that becomes public again, she said quietly, the company collapses. I sat there in stunned silence. She continued, so I need stability, public stability. She pushed the contract toward me again. A husband. I stared at the document. $500,000. 3 months. A fake marriage. I looked back at her. This still doesn't explain why you chose me. Victoria's gaze didn't waver. You helped someone in the building 3 months ago. My brow furrowed. What? A cleaning staff member fainted in the hallway on the 9th floor. The memory surfaced slowly. Oh, that. I'd found an older woman collapse near the elevator and called for help. Anyone would have done the same. Apparently not. Victoria said quietly, 32 employees walked past her before you stopped. That sentence settled into the air. She leaned forward slightly. Everyone else in this building works for the board. Her eyes locked on mine. You're the only one who doesn't. Silence filled the office again. Then she said something that changed everything. My son needs someone he can trust. And suddenly the contract on the desk didn't feel quite as absurd anymore. But I still shook my head. This is crazy. Victoria didn't disagree. Probably. Then she said one final thing. 3 months. She paused. Just don't fall in love with the lie. Outside the windows, lightning flickered faintly above the city. And somehow, I had the feeling my life had just stepped into a story I wasn't prepared for. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because of the money. Not even because of the insane proposal. It was the way Victoria had said those words. My son needs someone he can trust. That sentence stayed with me the entire drive home. I kept asking myself the same question over and over. What kind of life forces a billionaire CEO to ask a stranger to pretend to be her husband? By the time I fell asleep, the sun was already starting to rise. The next morning, everything changed. I hadn't even finished my coffee when my phone exploded with notifications. Messages from coworkers, news alerts, group chats. At first, I thought something had happened with the company. Then I saw the headline. Tech billionaire Victoria Hale, secretly married. My heart dropped into my stomach. I opened the article, and there it was. A photograph taken outside the HaleTech headquarters the night before. Victoria stepping into a car. And next to her, me. Not a clear photo, but clear enough. The article speculated wildly. Who was the mystery husband? Why had she kept it secret? Was this a strategic move before the upcoming board meeting? I stared at the screen in disbelief. She hadn't even waited. The phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. Ethan Carter. Victoria's voice came through the speaker, calm as always. Good morning. I rubbed my forehead. You started already? Yes. That wasn't part of the deal yet. It is now. Of course it was. You have 2 hours, she continued. Then a car will pick you up. For what? Moving day. Before I could argue, she hung up. I stared at the phone. My quiet, predictable life had officially collapsed. 2 hours later, a black sedan was waiting outside my apartment. Not just a car, a driver. The kind of car people step out of in movies when they're about to attend a gala. I grabbed a small suitcase and climbed in. The driver didn't say a word. The city rolled past outside the window. 20 minutes later, we stopped in front of the tallest residential tower downtown. The kind with glass walls and a lobby that looked like a luxury hotel. Penthouse. Of course. Inside, the elevator required a private key card. The doors opened directly into a massive living space. I stepped out slowly. The apartment was enormous. Glass walls, looking over the entire city. Dark wood floors. Minimal furniture. Everything perfect. And everything cold. Victoria stood near the window again. Same posture as the night before. Like she spent most of her life watching the city from above. "You're late," she said without turning. "I'm 5 minutes early." Still late. I dropped my suitcase near the couch. "So this is it?" "For now." I walked around slowly, trying not to look like someone who had just stepped into a billionaire's life. 3 months, she said. "Yes. Public appearances." "Okay. You will attend events with me when necessary." "Fine. You will live here." I stopped walking. "Here?" "Yes." "Same apartment?" She finally turned around. "This arrangement doesn't work if you live across town." "Fair point." She pointed toward the hallway. "Guest room." I followed her. The apartment had multiple bedrooms, but one door stood out. Closed. Locked. It was the only door in the hallway without a handle on the outside. I noticed it immediately. Victoria noticed that I noticed. Her voice hardened slightly. "That room is off limits." I nodded. "Understood." She looked at me for a moment, making sure. Then she walked back toward the living room. I followed. She picked up a tablet from the table and handed it to me. Media briefing. I skimmed through it. Fake backstory. How we supposedly met. How long we'd been dating. Where the private ceremony happened. "Vegas?" I asked. People believe Vegas. I couldn't argue with that logic. Then something else caught my eye. A photograph. Victoria. And a small boy, about 7 years old, smiling. It was the first time I had seen Victoria smiling. Actually smiling. Not the controlled expression she showed the world. This smile was real. "Lucas," I said quietly. Victoria glanced at the photo, then back at me. "Yes. Does he know about this? He knows you're staying here." "That's not the same thing." Victoria didn't respond. Instead, she walked toward the kitchen. "I'll introduce you tonight." My stomach tightened. "And what exactly am I supposed to say to him?" She paused, then answered honestly. "I don't know." That might have been the first real thing she'd said since I met her. Later that evening, I heard the elevator arrive. Victoria straightened slightly. "Lucas is here." I suddenly felt more nervous than I had during the entire fake marriage negotiation. Footsteps echoed through the hallway. Small ones. Then the elevator doors opened. A boy walked into the apartment, brown hair, backpack, 7 years old, just like Victoria said. He stopped when he saw me. His eyes studied me carefully. Not curious. Evaluating. Like he'd done this before. Victoria knelt slightly beside him. "Lucas, this is Ethan." Lucas didn't say hello. He just looked at me, then asked the strangest question. "Are you the new one?" The room went silent. I glanced at Victoria. She didn't move. Lucas looked back at me. His voice was calm, too calm for a kid his age. "Mom said someone like you might stay this time." I didn't know how to answer that. Then he said something that made the room feel colder. "Dads always leave." Victoria's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes flickered for just a moment. Lucas turned and walked down the hallway toward his room. The door closed quietly behind him. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I finally looked at Victoria. "You didn't tell me that part." She stared at the closed door. Her voice came out quieter than before. "Most people leave before they learn it." Outside the windows, the city lights glowed against the dark sky. And suddenly this fake marriage didn't feel like an act anymore. It felt like stepping into a story that had already broken someone's heart. The first week of our fake marriage was strange. Not dramatic. Not chaotic. Just strange. Victoria and I moved through the penthouse like two people living parallel lives. We had breakfast in the same kitchen but rarely spoke. We left for work in the same car, but sat in silence. To the outside world, we were newly married. To each other, we were still strangers, bound by a contract. But the real complication wasn't Victoria. It was Lucas. The first few days, he barely spoke to me. Not out of shyness, out of distance. Lucas had the quiet awareness of a kid who had learned to read adults too well. At dinner, he mostly listened, watched, measured, and when he did speak, it was usually a question that made me feel like I was being tested. The third night, he asked, "Are you rich?" I almost choked on my water. "No." He frowned slightly. "Then why did Mom marry you?" I glanced at Victoria. She didn't even look up from her plate. "Because he's good at computers," she said calmly. Lucas seemed to accept that explanation. Kids were funny like that. Sometimes the strangest lies worked perfectly. One evening a few days later, I came home from work to find Lucas sitting alone in the living room. The penthouse was unusually quiet. "Where's your mom?" I asked. "She's still at work." Typical. Victoria ran a company that never really stopped moving. Lucas was building something on the coffee table. A small wooden airplane. Pieces scattered everywhere. He looked up when I walked closer. "You know how to fix stuff?" "Sometimes." He handed me a small screwdriver without asking. The wing of the airplane had come loose. I tightened the screws carefully and gave it back. Lucas studied the airplane like a scientist, reviewing an experiment. Then he nodded. "Okay." High praise, apparently. He leaned back on the couch. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he asked another question. "Are you going to stay?" There it was. The question behind every conversation. I sat down across from him. "I'm here for a while." Lucas shook his head slightly. "That's what they all say." I didn't ask who they were. I already knew. A few nights later, something happened that changed the way I looked at everything. Victoria was working late again. Lucas had finished his homework and was wandering around the apartment. Eventually, he stopped near the hallway. Near the locked door, the same door Victoria had warned me about. Lucas noticed me watching. "That room's not for you." "I know." He studied me for a second. Then he shrugged. "You can see something else." He walked to his bedroom and came back with a small cardboard box. He set it on the table between us. "Don't laugh." "I won't." He opened the lid. Inside were pieces of paper, dozens of them. Small cards made with crayons and markers. Each one decorated differently. Stars, hearts, stick figures. At the top of every card were the same words. "For my future dad." My chest tightened. Lucas picked one up and handed it to me. The crayon letters were uneven, but the message was clear. "Welcome to our family." I didn't know what to say. Lucas looked at the cards quietly. "I make them sometimes." "Why?" "In case someone stays long enough." The words landed like a punch to the chest. He shrugged like it wasn't a big deal. "Mom says one day someone will." Then he added softly, "But nobody has yet." The room felt very still. For a moment I couldn't speak, not because I didn't have words, because none of them would have been good enough. Lucas suddenly looked embarrassed. He closed the box quickly. "You're not supposed to see those." I'm glad I did. He looked at me again, studying my face carefully, like he was trying to figure out if I was lying. Then he changed the subject completely. "You want to see something cool?" "Sure." He ran down the hallway and came back with a tablet. On the screen was an old photograph. Two men standing in front of a much smaller Hailtech office. One of them was younger Victoria. The other man had messy hair and a wide grin. Lucas pointed at him. "That's my dad, Daniel Ross." Even in a photograph, you could tell he had been the opposite of Victoria. Warm, relaxed, alive in a way she rarely allowed herself to be. Lucas scrolled through more pictures. Family photos, birthday cake, a park. Then the pictures stopped. "Mom doesn't show these much," Lucas said. "Why?" Lucas shrugged again. "Because people say bad stuff about him." The words came out quietly, but they hit hard. I remembered the news stories, the accusations, the scandal that nearly destroyed Hailtech. Daniel Ross, the founder who supposedly stole millions from his own company. Lucas looked down at the tablet. "Mom says he wasn't bad." His voice was small now, but everyone else says he was. He looked up at me. "Do you think my dad was bad?" I hesitated. "Careful. I think the truth is probably more complicated than people say." Lucas seemed to think about that. Then he nodded slowly. "I hope so." He closed the tablet, and for the first time since I met him, he asked me something different. "Do you want to stay for pizza?" That night we ordered pizza. Just the two of us. Lucas talked about school, video games, the neighbor's dog that barked too much. Normal kid stuff. But every so often, he glanced at the door, waiting for Victoria. When she finally came home after midnight, she stopped when she saw us on the couch. The pizza box. Lucas asleep beside me. The TV still glowing quietly. For a moment she just stood there, watching, her expression unreadable. Then she spoke softly. "You didn't have to stay." I lowered my voice. He didn't want to be alone. Victoria looked at Lucas for a long moment, then back at me. "Most people prefer not to get involved." I shrugged. "Most people aren't living here." She almost smiled. Almost. Then she turned toward the hallway. But before she disappeared, she said something quietly. "Lucas showed you the box, didn't he?" I froze. "How did you know?" Victoria didn't turn around. "Because he only shows it to people he hopes will stay." Her voice softened slightly. "And that's what scares me the most." Outside the windows, the city lights shimmered against the night, and somewhere in the back of my mind, a question had started forming. If Daniel Ross really stole from the company, why did Victoria still defend him? And why did Lucas believe his father was innocent? Something about the story didn't add up, and without realizing it yet, I was about to start digging for the truth. After that night, I couldn't stop thinking about Daniel Ross. Not because of the scandal, not because of the money, because of Lucas. The way he had asked that question, "Do you think my dad was bad?" It was the kind of question a kid shouldn't have to ask. And the more I thought about it, the more something about the story didn't feel right. The official version was simple. 7 years ago, Daniel Ross, co-founder of Hale Tech, had been accused of moving millions of dollars out of company accounts into offshore shells. The board launched an internal investigation. Before it concluded, Daniel died in a car accident. The company survived. Barely. Victoria took full control of Hale Tech and rebuilt it from the ground up. That was the story everyone knew. But something didn't add up. If Daniel really had been guilty, why did Victoria still defend him? Why keep photographs? Why let Lucas believe his father was innocent? Victoria Hale was not a sentimental person. She was practical, strategic, the kind of person who cut away weakness without hesitation, which meant one thing. If she believed Daniel Ross wasn't a thief, there was probably a reason. 2 days later, I stayed late at work. Not unusual for someone in IT. Servers don't care about office hours. But that night, I wasn't fixing a network problem. I was digging. The company's digital archives went back more than a decade. Old server logs, security footage, financial systems. Most people didn't realize how much data corporations kept. They just forgot it existed. 7 years ago was a long time in technology. The storage systems had changed twice since then, which meant a lot of the old data had been migrated into forgotten backup drives. And buried in those drives, sometimes strange things survived. Around midnight, I found something interesting. An archive storage directory labeled Security, CAM, Legacy. The files were massive. Video, thousands of hours of security camera recordings from the early days of Hale Tech, most of it useless. Empty hallways, night security patrols. But one thing caught my attention. A timestamp. June 1, 7 years ago, the same week Daniel Ross had been accused of fraud. I leaned back in my chair, curious, then opened the file. The video loaded slowly. Black and white footage from an old hallway camera. The date flickered in the corner. Late evening, almost midnight. The hallway was empty for a long time. Then a man appeared. Daniel Ross. Even grainy security footage couldn't hide the energy he had in those old photos Lucas showed me. He walked quickly down the hallway, holding a laptop, looking over his shoulder, nervous. I leaned closer to the screen. A few seconds later, another figure entered the frame. Older, tall, swit. Even in the grainy video, I recognized him instantly. Richard Cole, member of the Hale Tech board. The same man currently leading the push to remove Victoria as CEO. In the video, Daniel stopped. They argued. No sound, but the body language was obvious. Daniel gesturing angrily. Richard trying to calm him down. Then Daniel opened the laptop and turned it toward Richard, showing him something. Richard's expression changed. Even through the low-resolution video, the shift was obvious. Daniel pointed at the screen. Richard shook his head. Then, Daniel turned and walked away. Fast. Determined. Richard stayed behind, standing alone in the hallway, his face completely still. The video ended. I sat back slowly. My heart was beating faster now. This wasn't proof of anything. Not yet. But it meant something important. Daniel Ross had discovered something that night. And whatever it was, he had confronted Richard Cole about it. The next day I went deeper. Financial logs from the same period, system access records, archived admin accounts. Most of it had been cleaned up long ago. But digital footprints rarely disappear completely. After hours of searching, I found another file, hidden inside a backup database. A transfer record. Large amounts of money moved through an internal account. But the authorization ID attached to the transfer didn't belong to Daniel Ross. It belonged to someone else. The name appeared slowly on the screen. Ayer Cole. My stomach tightened. Richard Cole. I stared at the screen. If this was real, then Daniel Ross hadn't stolen anything. He had discovered someone else doing it. I leaned back in my chair. Suddenly, everything made sense. The argument in the hallway. Daniel's urgency. The scandal. And the accident that happened only days later. My mind raced through the possibilities. If Richard Cole had been responsible for moving the money, and Daniel had found out, then Daniel wasn't the criminal. He was the whistleblower, and someone had buried the truth. That night, I didn't go home right away. Instead, I copied the files onto an encrypted drive, not because I planned to expose anything yet, because something about this situation felt dangerous. Corporate power struggles rarely ended politely, especially when billions of dollars were involved. When I finally returned to the penthouse, the lights were low. Victoria was sitting near the window again, Lucas asleep on the couch. She glanced up when I walked in. "You're late." I was working. She studied my face for a moment. Something about her expression told me she knew I wasn't telling the whole story. But she didn't ask. Instead, she looked back at the city lights. Then she said quietly, "The board scheduled the vote." My chest tightened. "When?" 3 days. 3 days before they attempted to remove her as CEO, the clock was ticking. Victoria didn't look worried, not on the outside, but something in her voice had changed. Less steel, more weight. She said one more thing before standing up. "Richard Cole believes he's already won." Then she walked toward the hallway, leaving me alone in the quiet apartment. I looked down at the drive in my hand. If the evidence on it was real, then Richard Cole wasn't just trying to remove Victoria. He had been hiding the truth about Daniel Ross for 7 years. And suddenly I realized something else. The board meeting in 3 days wasn't just about Victoria's future. It was about exposing a lie that had lasted almost a decade. The morning of the board meeting felt strangely quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that comes before something breaks. Victoria was already dressed when I walked into the kitchen. Dark suit, hair pulled back. The same calm expression she always wore in public. But I had lived in the penthouse long enough now to notice the small things. She hadn't slept. The coffee in front of her was untouched. Lucas was still asleep down the hall. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said quietly, "The vote is at 10. I nodded. She glanced at me. "You don't need to come." That almost made me laugh. "You think I'm sitting this one out?" Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You've already done enough." "No," I said. "I haven't." I reached into my jacket and placed the encrypted drive on the table. Victoria looked down at it, then slowly back at me. "What is that?" Something Richard Cole hoped nobody would ever find. For the first time since I met her, Victoria Hale looked genuinely surprised. An hour later, we entered the Hale Tech headquarters together. The building felt different that morning. Whispers in the hallways. Executives moving quickly. Everyone knew something big was happening. The board meeting had been scheduled weeks earlier, but the rumors had spread. People were betting on the outcome. Would Victoria Hale keep control of the company she built, or would the board remove her and install someone else? As we approached the boardroom, a man stepped out into the hallway. Tall, gray hair, sharp suit. Richard Cole. He smiled when he saw Victoria, but there was no warmth in it. "Victoria," he said smoothly, "you're right on time." Victoria didn't slow down. "I always am." His eyes shifted to me. "And this must be the husband." I didn't answer. Richard chuckled softly. "Interesting choice." Victoria pushed open the boardroom doors without another word. The Hale Tech boardroom was enormous. A long, polished table, floor-to-ceiling windows behind it, 12 chairs filled with the most powerful people in the company. Investors, directors, lawyers, all of them watching as we entered. The tension in the room was thick enough to taste. Richard walked in behind us and took his seat at the head of the table. "Shall we begin?" he said. No one objected. He folded his hands calmly. "As you all know, we're here today to discuss concerns regarding the leadership of Hale Tech." His eyes moved to Victoria. Specifically, the matter of undisclosed personal information that may present a risk to the company. A few members shifted in their chairs. Everyone knew what he meant. "Lucas." Victoria sat perfectly still. "If you have an accusation, Richard," she said calmly, "say it." He smiled again. "Very well." He leaned forward slightly. "Victoria Hale has concealed the existence of a child whose father was Daniel Ross." A murmur spread around the table. Richard continued. "As we all remember, Daniel Ross was investigated for the misappropriation of company funds before his death. He looked around the room. If the public learns that the current CEO has a child connected to that scandal, the consequences for Hale Tech could be catastrophic." Then he leaned back. "For the good of the company, I propose we vote to remove Victoria Hale as CEO." The words hung in the air, heavy, calculated. Victoria didn't react. She simply looked at the other board members, waiting. Then someone spoke. "What evidence do we have that the information was intentionally concealed?" Richard gestured toward a folder. "Plenty. But before he could continue, another voice spoke from the doorway. Actually, there's something you should see first. Every head turned. A man stepped into the room, James Harper, the company's lead attorney. He walked in calmly, carrying a laptop. Richard frowned. This meeting is restricted. James didn't stop walking. Not when the outcome involves potential criminal liability. That got everyone's attention. James placed the laptop on the table. Then he looked at Richard. You might want to stay seated for this. Richard's smile tightened. What exactly is this supposed to be? James didn't answer. Instead, he turned the screen toward the large display at the end of the room. The video appeared. Black and white security footage. 7 years old. A hallway in the old Hailtech building. Daniel Ross, walking quickly through the frame. The room fell silent. Then Richard appeared in the video, standing in the hallway, arguing with Daniel. The footage continued. Daniel opened his laptop and showed Richard something on the screen. Richard's expression changed. Around the boardroom table, people leaned forward, watching. James paused the video, then opened another file. Financial transfer records. Millions of dollars moving through internal company accounts. Authorization ID displayed clearly. He zoomed in. And eyed. A long silence filled the room. Then James spoke quietly. The funds Daniel Ross was accused of stealing. He turned slowly toward Richard. Were actually transferred by you. Richard's face had gone pale. That's absurd. James tapped the screen. Daniel Ross discovered the transfers. He resumed the video. The argument. Daniel leaving the hallway. Determined. Angry. James closed the laptop slowly. He was preparing to expose the fraud. The room was completely silent now. Richard stood abruptly. This is manipulation. James remained calm. We've already forwarded the evidence to federal investigators. Richard's mouth opened, closed again. He looked around the table, searching for allies. But no one spoke. The balance of power in the room had shifted completely. Then Victoria turned to me, her voice quieter than before. Why? I met her eyes, then answered honestly. Because Lucas deserves to know his father wasn't a thief. The words echoed in the silent boardroom. No one moved. No one spoke. And for the first time that morning, Richard Cole looked afraid. The silence inside the boardroom stretched longer than anyone expected. No one moved. No one spoke. The evidence was still glowing on the screen behind James Harper's laptop, the financial record frozen on the authorization code. R. Cole. Richard Cole's hands were shaking now, though he tried to hide it. That proves nothing, he said, forcing a laugh that sounded brittle. A transfer authorization can be fabricated. James didn't even look at him. It already went to federal investigators this morning. That sentence landed like a hammer. Around the table, the board members exchanged uneasy looks. These were people used to power, strategy, and quiet negotiations. But criminal fraud was different. It meant subpoenas, audits, investigations that dragged companies through headlines and courtrooms. One of the directors finally spoke. Richard, is this true? Richard's jaw tightened. You're going to believe some manipulated footage over. Another director cut him off. The authorization record came from our own archive system. The room turned colder. Victoria hadn't said a word since the video played. She was simply watching Richard. Not with anger, not even with satisfaction, just quiet certainty. Finally, the chairman of the board cleared his throat. I believe we need to address something else. He looked directly at Richard. If Daniel Ross was not responsible for the missing funds, he let the sentence hang. No one needed it finished. Richard's composure finally cracked. You think I did this? He snapped. The chairman didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned to the rest of the board. I move that Richard Cole be suspended from the board pending the outcome of a federal investigation. One by one, hands slowly lifted around the table. 10. 11. Unanimous. Richard stood abruptly, knocking his chair backward. This is absurd, he hissed. But the power he had walked into the room with was gone. No one defended him. No one even looked at him anymore. Security arrived minutes later, quiet, professional, and Richard Cole left the boardroom without another word. When the doors closed behind him, the room felt different, lighter, but heavier in another way. The chairman turned toward Victoria. Well, he said slowly, it appears the situation has changed. Victoria finally spoke. For 7 years, she said calmly, Daniel Ross has been remembered as a man who betrayed this company. She looked around the table. That was a lie. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. He discovered financial manipulation inside this company and was preparing to expose it. She paused. Today we know the truth. No one argued. No one challenged her. The chairman nodded once. Then we'll issue a public statement correcting the record. Victoria didn't react immediately. Instead, she said something quieter. Do that. Then she stood. The meeting was over. Outside the boardroom, the hallway felt strangely empty. James Harper gave me a small nod. Good work. I shrugged. I just followed the trail. He smiled faintly. Most people would have ignored it. Then he walked away. Victoria was standing near the window at the end of the corridor, looking down at the city. When I approached, she didn't turn right away. After a moment, she asked, Did you know? Know what? That this could destroy Richard Cole. I thought about it. I knew it could destroy a lie. That made her exhale slowly. Then she looked at me. For Lucas, this matters. Yeah, I said. It does. That evening we returned to the penthouse. Lucas was sitting at the kitchen table with a comic book spread out in front of him. When we walked in, he looked up. Did the meeting go okay? Victoria paused. Then she crouched beside him. Lucas, there's something I need to tell you. Kids notice things adults miss. Lucas immediately knew this wasn't a normal conversation. He set the comic aside. About Dad? Victoria nodded slowly. For a long time, people believed your father did something wrong. Lucas didn't speak. But today, she continued gently, we proved that wasn't true. Lucas blinked. What do you mean? I stepped closer. Your dad found someone stealing money from the company. Lucas stared at us, and he tried to stop them. Victoria's voice softened. He was trying to protect the company. Lucas looked down at the table for a moment. Then he whispered, So, he wasn't bad? Victoria shook her head. No. Lucas didn't cry. Kids rarely do in moments like that. Instead, he just nodded slowly, like he was rearranging something inside his mind. After a moment, he looked at me. Did you find that? I hesitated, then nodded. Yeah. Lucas stood up and walked over, and before I knew what he was doing, he hugged me. It was quick, awkward, the kind of hug kids give when they're still figuring out emotions. But it hit harder than anything that happened in that boardroom. Thanks, he said quietly. Later that night, the penthouse was quiet again. Lucas had fallen asleep on the couch. Victoria stood near the balcony window. I joined her. The city lights stretched out below us. After a while, she said, The agreement ends tomorrow. She meant the contract. The fake marriage. 30 days. Public stability. Crisis management. That was the deal. I nodded. Yeah. Neither of us spoke for a minute. Then she asked, What will you do now? Probably go back to fixing servers. That made the smallest hint of a smile appear. The world's most unusual husband returns to normal life. Something like that. She looked at me carefully. You changed things here. I shrugged. Just helped fix something broken. Then a small voice came from behind us. Wait. Lucas stood in the hallway. Sleepy, hair messy, looking between us. You're leaving? I crouched down slightly. The contract was temporary, remember? Lucas frowned. Then he asked the question that hit harder than anything else in this entire story. Are you leaving too? The room went quiet. Victoria didn't answer. Neither did I. Lucas looked between us again, then said softly, Because it doesn't feel fake anymore. The kid had a way of saying things adults were too careful to say. Victoria finally looked at me. Not like a CEO, not like someone calculating outcomes. Just like a person standing at the edge of something uncertain. For the first time since this whole story started, she didn't have a plan, and honestly, neither did I. But sometimes, the most honest answer is the simplest one. So I said, maybe we don't have to decide tonight. Lucas seemed satisfied with that. He nodded, then shuffled back toward the couch. A minute later, he was asleep again. Victoria exhaled slowly, then said something so quietly I almost missed it. You were supposed to be temporary. I leaned against the balcony railing. Yeah. She looked out at the city, then added, Some things aren't. And for the first time since the night she asked me to pretend to be her husband, the future didn't feel like a performance. It felt real.